This is only what Moses and the prophets said would come. The channel whose singular purpose is to restore Messianic prophecy to the vital center of the faith of Messiah Jesus, where the apostles always placed it and where the evidence always stood. Now, you probably heard two versions of Christianity in your life. The first says, here's the concept. Here is God, sin, redemption, and so on. Accept the framework. Trust the doctrine. The second says something happened, a miracle. Just believe it. Now, a lot of people lost their footing somewhere between those two versions. Pure concept without grounding feels like philosophy. Elegant, maybe, but weightless. And pure miracle without meaning feels like spectacle. Remarkable, maybe, but unaccountable. Neither one by itself feels like truth you can stand on. What I want to show you is that neither version is actually Christianity, at least not the Christianity of the first century, which is not a philosophy and not a spectacle. It was something more structurally sophisticated than either, an encounter with a divine artifact, as I call it. Something God produced in history, something that arrived in the mind from outside the mind, something that no human being or institution could have manufactured, and which, precisely because it could not have been manufactured, constitutes the only ground for faith that does not ultimately reduce to a mirror. Now, I want you to begin with a distinction that will carry the entire argument. A phenomenon is not only something that happens in the world, it's what arrives in the mind when the world is encountered. The full register of sense, weight, presence, and data before the mind has organized any of it. The event is objective. The mental copy of it is phenomenal. The phenomenon is the data delivered. Now, a concept is what the mind does with the data. It compresses, indexes, categorizes, turns the flood of raw encounter into a retrievable unit of meaning. Think of a Rolodex. Every card represents the mind's organized entry for something in the world. A name on the card is the concept. The actual person, their voice, their weight, their presence, objectively, is the phenomenon. The card is not the person. It is the mind's condensed pointer toward a reality it represents but cannot constitute. Now, the Rolodex can't exist without phenomena. Without a referent, it's useless. But phenomena exist without the Rolodex. The person is real whether or not you have their card. This asymmetry is foundational. Phenomena are primary, concepts are derivative. The concept serves the phenomenon, never the reverse. Now, Jerry Fodor's language of thought hypothesis gives us the technical definition we need here for concept. Concepts are mental symbols, discrete, atomic representations in an internal computational system. Thought is the manipulation of these symbols according to formal rules. The symbols are combinable and compositional. They have semantic content, meaning they are about something in the world. But, and this is the pressure point, the formal system itself does not explain how the symbols acquire that content. The Rolodex card has a name on it, but nothing in the card itself explains why that name refers to a real person rather than a fiction. And that's precisely the problem Stephen Harnard identified in his 1990 paper as the symbol grounding problem. A symbol system cannot ground itself. You cannot explain what a symbol means by translating it into more symbols. That is turtles all the way down, an infinite regress of tokens pointing back to tokens. For a symbol to mean something, it must eventually be anchored in something non-symbolic, sensory contact with the world. The kind of direct phenomenal encounter that is not itself a formal representation. The token cannot validate its own referent. Only something arriving in the mind from outside the mind, from objective reality, not from the symbol system, gives the concept something to stand on. Now add a further distinction that everything else depends on. Concepts exist only in the mind. They are abstractions. No weight, no location, no causal force in the physical world. The objective world, in the objective world, there are no concepts. There are only things. But there's one category of physical object that bridges the gap, the artifact. Anything in the physical world manipulated or made by human beings, a tool, a temple, a document, a sacrificial system, is objective and touchable, but it also carries intentional meaning. It is the mind's concept externalized into matter. Now, this raises the question that unlocks the argument. Is there a divine artifact, a divine one, a miraculous one, not a human artifact pointing to concepts about God, but something God himself produced in the physical world? Objective, datable, examinable, that arrives in the mind as the mental copy of a miraculous action, and from which all legitimate theological concepts must descend. If no, then every concept theology produces is grounded only in other concepts, and we never leave the closed loop of human cognition. If yes, then faith has a phenomenal base it did not manufacture. It was produced elsewhere, deposited in history, and can be examined. The answer is yes. And it is the specific character of that answer that the apostolic proclamation was built upon. Now, before examining the divine artifact, we need to see what happens to cognition when concept and phenomenon are severed, because the consequences are not merely theological, they are a matter of sanity. A mind that forms beliefs without phenomenal grounding, from feeling alone, from other ideas, from internal states with no external check, produces concepts, ideas, beliefs that cannot be corrected by the world because they were never accountable to it. You can't rationally come to believe you are a pink dog from Venus. That belief has no objective anchor. A perception of reality that is systematically severed from the objective world generates mental data that cannot steer concept formation toward anything real. The concepts circulate only within the mind that produces them. They can't inform intelligible action. They are useless to thought except as thought. Now, the opposite failure is equally disabling. A mind that is purely phenomenal, that receives the data of the world without conceptual depth, is something closer to an animal's cognition. The phenomena arrive but can't penetrate with gravity. They do not inspire or generalize, can't reach empathy, love, moral obligation, or any higher truth. The animal experiences the world but cannot ascend from it. Now, neither is fully human. Full cognition requires both in proper relation, phenomena that discipline concepts, keeping them anchored to objective reality, and concepts that elevate phenomena, allowing the mind to find in what it encounters something more than the immediately sensory. Now I want to bring this to God. Notice how the requirement sharpens to the absolute. Mundane phenomena produce mundane concepts. A mind working on ordinary data and calling its output theology has not escaped the animal ceiling. It has dressed it in more sophisticated language. The ceiling of the concept is always determined by the floor of the phenomena. For the mind to form concepts about God that genuinely reach the transcendent, not projections, not cultural constructions, not feeling in metaphysical clothing, the phenomena that ground them must themselves be miraculous. They must originate outside human production and natural process. They must arrive as the copy of something God actually did in objective history. And they must be identifiable, examinable, falsifiable, impossible to account for by any other agency. The phenomena upon which the faith of Messiah Jesus is built are historical, miraculous, and scriptural, objective, verifiable, demonstrated in a pattern of correspondence no human production explains, and universally accessible, not locked in private experience, not requiring prior commitment in the form of a physical document that anyone can open and examine. This is precisely the structure of what Israel was given. Not a concept, not a philosophical tradition, not a physical object. The prophetic records, scrolls, datable documents, text inscribed in objective history by human hands, preserved in human institutions, and containing within that ordinary human artifact something no human being produced, the announced testimony of what God would do centuries before it happened. The divine artifact here has two poles. One is the prior written testimony, the documents of Moses, the Psalms, the prophets, inscribed across more than 1,000 years. The other is the historical fulfillment, the life, death, and resurrection of one person in whom everything the documents described converged. Neither pole alone constitutes the miracle. The miracle is the correspondence between them, specific, multi-sourced, converging, and impossible to have been produced by any human coordination across that span of time. When that correspondence is seen in the mind, when the prior written record and the fulfillment event are held together and the fit is examined, what arrives in the mind is not ordinary data anymore. It is the mental copy of something God did in history across centuries. It is miraculous mental phenomena. And it is from this, and only from this, that the concepts of the faith, Messiah, atonement, resurrection, new covenant, spirit, eschatology, receive their grounding. The concepts are not floating speculations. They are not reified by others like themselves. They are the mind's organized response to a demonstration it did not produce and cannot dissolve. Which raises an urgent question. What does theology look like when the divine artifact that I'm speaking of is quietly set aside and the concepts are left to validate each other? You get exactly what most of modern academic theology is right now, and getting more so as time goes on. You get Logos reified by God and God reified by Logos. Two concepts in a closed loop, each defining the other, neither anchored to the artifact that gave both their content. John says the Word became flesh, a phenomenally explosive claim pointing to a body, a document trail more than 1,000 years deep, a death and resurrection that either happened or it did not. But when theology abstracts the Logos into Greek metaphysics and Neoplatonic categories, it's traded a phenomenon for a concept and called the exchange and advance. You get the ontological argument, God defined as the greatest conceivable being whose non-existence would be a contradiction. Internally elegant, phenomenally empty. No document examined, no divine artifact consulted. A concept attempting to prove itself by internal necessity, which is exactly what Fodor's grounding problem tells us no concept can do. And you get Tillich's God as the ground of being itself, the God beyond God, internally elaborate, phenomenally inert. Nothing in the prior written testimony derives this construction. It is a concept of God rebuilt from philosophical categories to answer existential anxieties with no external anchor and nothing verifiable. You get liberal Protestantism reducing Jesus to supreme moral teacher, the kingdom to ethical ideal, miracles and prophetic fulfillment set aside as pre-scientific embarrassments. What remains is a concept of Jesus validated by moral appeal and cultural resonance, mundane mental phenomena producing a mundane concept and calling it faith. Every one of these reifies ideas with ideas. Everyone builds from the inside out, from the mind's own conceptual resources, philosophical preferences, cultural anxieties toward a God defined by those resources, rather than encountered through the artifact he produced. Everyone is, in the precise philosophical sense, idealist. Truth produced by human cognition alone, dressed in the language of scholarship and reverence, with a back reference to the prophetic somewhere. A theology without the divine artifact has no external check. It can't be falsified. It can't be handed to a skeptic for examination. It can't sustain a believer when suffering strips away the feeling that made the concept compelling. It's a closed system. And closed systems are always ultimately a mirror. They show you what you already believed and call the reflection revelation. Now, when concept and phenomena come apart, distortion follows in both directions. Concept without phenomena produces ideology, or really ideolatry, the worship of concepts. A closed system requiring no external verification, indistinguishable from a communal decision to believe something together. Phenomenon without concept produces raw spectacle with no meaning, an anomaly that can be marveled at but not received. Their separation always distorts. When they come together properly, in the right order, the concept makes the phenomena legible. It tells you what you are looking at, and the phenomena reifies the concept. It takes the idea out of speculation and anchors it in something that actually occurred. Together they constitute testimony. A divine miraculous artifact meets this requirement in a way nothing else does. The correspondence between the prior written testimony and the historical fulfillment is not the product of human intention at either end. The prophets who inscribed it did not understand the full weight of what they were writing. The events that fulfilled it were not engineered to match the documents. The institutions that preserved the documents had no more motive to preserve a record pointing toward a Messiah they would ultimately reject. And the correspondence is there, specific, convergent, across more than 1,000 years, targeted onto one person with a density that exceeds any range, coincidence, or planning can produce. This is the structure of transcendent demonstration, not argument from within the system, arrival from outside it. God acting in history, not as a concept to be inferred, but as an agent whose actions are on record. Jesus did not go around Galilee saying, accept the concept of Messiah. He never asked for capitulation to an idea floating free in the world. And the apostles did not preach, something extraordinary happened, just believe it. Peter at Pentecost did not lead with personal testimony. Paul in every synagogue did not open with subjective experience. What first century Christianity was, in its original apostolic form, was the presentation of the divine artifact, the prior documents, the historical fulfillment, and the correspondence between them, held up together and examined. their correspondence constituting a supernatural demonstration. The concept, Messiah, suffering servant, risen Lord, made legible by the phenomena, the events, and the phenomena made recognizable by the concept already inscribed in the documents. The whole structure irreducible to anything human agency produced. 3 moments where Jesus makes this explicit. In Nazareth, he is handed the scroll of Isaiah. He reads from chapter 61, the Anointed One. Good news to the poor, release to captives, recovery of sight to the blind. He rolls it up, sits down, and says, "Today the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." He's not offering a new idea. He is pointing to the prior document, inscribed centuries before his birth, and identifying the phenomenon now unfolding as fulfillment by him. The concept preceded the event. The event reifies the concept. The divine artifact is being reactivated. When John the Baptist sends from prison asking, "Where are you the one, Jesus?" Jesus does not answer with a doctrine or bare miracle. He says, "Go tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor receive good news. Messianic prophecies fulfilled." Every item drawn directly from what Isaiah foretold. He's not pointing to the miracle as self-sufficient. He is pointing past the miracles to the written forecast that anticipated it centuries earlier. Let the correspondence between text and event speak. The fulfillment is the answer. And on the road to Emmaus, 2 devastated disciples are walking away from Jerusalem. Their miracle faith has collapsed. The risen Jesus joins them unrecognized and does not immediately reveal himself. He opens the scriptures, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, interpreting in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. When they later recognize him and he vanishes, they say, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he opened to us the scriptures?" The recognition did not come from the resurrection appearance alone. It came from the open documents being shown to account for everything that happened. Jesus rebuilt their faith on the artifact before he showed them his face, because faith built on the documents does not require his visible presence to stand. The artifact outlasts any single encounter. Now here's what I want you to see. Jesus was not pointing to his miracles as the greatest miracle. And he was not pointing to his words as the greatest word. He was pointing through them, through the divine artifact already on record before he arrived. Faith based on miracles alone is naive, tidally locked to the imminent. It rises with the miracle and falls with the man. This is exactly why the disciples scattered on Good Friday. Miracle faith has no resources for a dead Messiah. Faith based on concepts and argument alone is idealist, also locked to the imminent, only as durable as the argument and only as transcendence as mundane data can carry it. History is full of impressive theological systems. If Jesus is primarily a concept, he competes in that category. And in that category, he can be out-argued. Both are locked to the same gravitational field. Neither reaches the transcendent ground. The greater miracle is not the healing or the feeding of the 5,000 or even the resurrection standing alone as a bare event. The greater miracle is the divine artifact itself, as I call it, specific, convergent, multi-sourced, prophetic prediction inscribed across more than 1,000 years by writers who did not know each other fulfilled in verifiable historical events with a precision and density that no human being or conspiracy of human beings could have produced. Psalm 16 and what was foretold of the one who would not see corruption. Psalms 22 and the portrait of a death by exposure that precedes by centuries the event it describes. Psalms 110 and the one seated at the right hand who is also David's Lord. Daniel's arithmetic pointing to the cutting off of an anointed one. Isaiah 53 and the servant wounded for transgressions of others, cut off from the land of the living, yet seeing his offspring after the ordeal. Genesis 22 and the son offered and received back as from the dead. Every one of these was on record. None of it was understood as a unit before the events that unified it. The pattern became visible in fulfillment, historical fulfillment, and its visibility is the miracle still happening every time someone opens the documents and sees the correspondence for the first time. The greater word is not the Sermon on the Mount or the Logos of John's prologue as a philosophical category. The greater word is the prior witness, Moses, the Psalms, the prophets, the document trail God inscribed in history before the events it describes. The word spoken into the record of time, waiting for the moment when what was stated centuries earlier would occur, so that when it occurred, it could be recognized as fulfillment and not coincidence. And the hinge, the greater miracle and the greater word are not two things. They are one. Fulfilled prophecy is simultaneously the greatest word ever spoken and the greatest miracle ever performed. The prior written testimony is the concept pole of the divine artifact. The historical fulfillment is the phenomenon pole. When they are seen together, concept becomes phenomenon and phenomenon becomes concept. They fuse. And that fused testimony is not locked to any one moment, any one man's presence, any one generation's experience. It cannot be undone by death, silence, absence, or argument. The artifact persists. The documents are open. Now, does this constitute proof? Yes. But not scientific proof in the eminent sense. The resurrection cannot be run again in a laboratory, and demanding that kind of verification for singular historical events is not rigor, it is applying the wrong instrument to the wrong object, and not proof by personal conviction. I know that I know of purely subjective experience which cannot be examined, shared, or handed to a skeptic, and which quietly reduces Christianity to a feeling. What the divine artifact constitutes is historical and testimonial proof. Prior documents with verifiable dates, traceable agreement between what was inscribed and what occurred, independent sources that did not coordinate, a pattern of correspondence so dense and precisely targeted into a single person across more than 1,000 years that it exceeds any range, coincidence, or human planning can account for. The documents are open. The examination can begin at any time. Now, the root of the problem that nobody names. The retreat of Western Christianity into subjective idealism is not an escape from bad doctrine. It is an escape from the divine artifact, from Messianic prophecy. Those are not the same thing. Peter at Pentecost did not lead with experience. He opened Joel and the Psalms and said, look at the agreement between what was foretold and what you are now witnessing. Paul did not open with testimony. He reasoned from the prior witness, showing that Messiah had to suffer and rise, and that Jesus was the one the documents described. You have not preserved that ground by not formally denying it. If the prophetic correspondence occupies 30 seconds of a 40-minute sermon once a year, if it never drives your evangelism or anchors your theology, you have functionally abandoned the artifact. Presence of a doctrinal list is not centrality in practice. And the result is a faith that cannot answer the skeptic, cannot sustain the disillusioned believer, and is, in the precise philosophical sense, a system of concepts floating above a phenomenal ground it has forgotten how to touch. The position stated plainly: phenomenal Christianity is not a theological option among others. It is not a school of thought. It is not a hermeneutical preference. It is the recognition that all correct theology must be phenomenally led, that the concept must stand on the event. The event must stand on the prior written testimony, and the prior written testimony is the divine artifact God deposited in history before the events it describes. Remove the divine artifact and you have religion. Concepts validating concepts. Mundane mental phenomena producing mundane theological constructions. The mind examining itself and calling the product faith. Retain the divine artifact and you have revelation. Miraculous mental phenomena arriving from outside the mind, grounding concepts that are moral and accountable to something God actually did in the world across a span of time no human agency commanded. Christology, soteriology, pneumonology, eschatology, the entire conceptual architecture stands on that foundation or floats above it. When any part of it forgets this, the correction is always the same. Return to the documents. Return to the prior witness. Return to the place where what was stated centuries earlier happened.